guys could help lead this, and I just want to start and see what questions you have and what things you thought about while we were talking, and start from there. And then if there's specific topics that you guys want to go in deeper, if you want to talk about supplements or hydration, we can pull up some of that information and go more technical that way. But let's start with some questions or thoughts. Anybody have anything about the field, about sports nutrition in general, the teams, my experiences, anything you guys can think of?
I have a bunch of questions.
Okay.
Plenty of time. Oh,
Keep that one down there. Okay. We got this.
All right, so I have a list of questions, but so I'll start by trying to pick just one. One observation, so I'm doing the Master's in Applied Nutrition program, and I've been focusing a lot of my projects on nutrition for athletes, and I am particularly interested in plant-based nutrition for athletes, but also just broadly as well. One thing that's been coming up for me as I do my research is it seems that there is a lot of research that focuses on like specific aspects of performance nutrition. Like, what do you eat to maximize your muscle protein synthesis? What do you eat to maximize your endurance? But what I don't see is a lot of research that focuses on like the intersection between like performance and also longevity. So are there certain things that maybe athletes are doing that are helping them in the immediate and short term, but maybe aren't conducive to their long-term health?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that's a great point when you're looking at any sort of research, is to think of, okay, they're looking at this one thing, but what about the whole diet? So the research on saturated fat and dairy products, for example. Okay, people that eat high-fat dairy had more heart disease, for example. But what else are those people eating? And people that eat high-fat dairy also eat fried foods. You know, those intersections sometimes get lost in the research and in the headlines. So I would definitely make sure you pay attention to that. So good question. The first thing that comes to my mind with that are supplements. There are so many bad products out there, and I don't know if any of you saw, especially you if you're interested in the plant-based stuff, there is, the Consumer Report just came out with the levels of heavy metals that they've been finding in protein powders, plant-based protein powders, that proclaim to be so much healthier than their, whey protein versions, animal-derived proteins. Then they found they have high levels of lead and other things in there that we haven't found. So there's a lot more that we need to know. Also, high doses of certain minerals, vitamins that you may need for a certain period of time. But what's that going to do to you long term? I have an athlete who has a sponsorship, many that have sponsorships with supplement companies, but he gets a certain allotment. He wants to use it all. So he gets $5,000 in product a year. So he's taking like 5, 6, 7 different types of pills every day just because he can. It's available to him. There's nothing that we can see that's going to harm him right now, but we don't know what's going to happen in the future. So for me, that's a big one. And always talking about needing to have those quick energy sources does end up, athletes consume a lot of sugar, more than average people, which we're telling them to do. It makes sense right in this moment, but maybe are there long-term consequences? Or do people keep those habits up even after they're done competing? Are they still eating Cliff Bars and Gatorade? And what are we doing long term? So those are the first things that I would think of. Yeah. Other questions along that line? What do you think? If you haven't seen those reports, Clean Label Project is the one that's looking into products, and they do pet food, they do baby food, and then they just started looking at supplements, and they came out with this report recently through the Clean Label Project, where they've analyzed and found these different things. So it was actually 2 products that I recommend all the time, so I was like, oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? So the next question is, this sounds bad that you have lead in here, obviously, but lead comes from soil. Lead comes from the plants. How bad is this? What do we do with the information now that we have it? So sometimes opens up a can of worms. And same thing with collecting any sort of data. Sometimes we think more data, the better. Body comp and labs and heights and blah, blah, blah. But then if you have all this data, you have to know what to do with it. So keep that in mind too. Anyone else have questions? You have a list? You can keep going down your list too. Go for it.
Encourage people that are online to hashtag UNE Nutrition Symposium with their questions.
Okay, and if you're listening online, make sure that you hashtag your questions with UNE Nutrition Symposium, and we'll address those too.
All right, so another question. So this is something I hesitate to ask even because I don't believe in it personally, but it intrigues me, and I kind of suspect I know how you might answer. But I do a lot of training with triathletes, and and they're often like older. They're not college-age athletes, and I see some people who I have a lot of respect for who also are pursuing these ketogenic diets and really believe in them for the endurance aspects and being fat burning. And when I've dug into the research or tried to dig into the research, I get a little frustrated because it conflicts with everything I believe in, but I can't find a lot of research that says it's that bad. So I would love to hear your perspective on the ketogenic diet.
I've been answering so many keto questions lately. It's everywhere. I have a lot of thoughts. So my number one overriding thought with any of these diet programs and anything that people are doing really is if it's not causing harm and the person thinks it's helping them, fine, cool. I don't care. As long as it's being safely done, you're not going to test positive for anything, whatever. But there's no reason why that should work. It's never something that I would recommend. And if anyone's unfamiliar with keto, it's a very, very extreme carbohydrate restriction so that your body is forced to go into ketosis. The diet was developed as a treatment for epilepsy. They thought if we can get the brain using ketones instead of sugar, we can maybe calm the activity in there. But it's a very, very extreme. I have had some athletes tell me they're following it, but there's no way a college athlete eating in a dorm cafeteria is able to follow that, first of all. So if you're sort of halfway doing it, then you've totally lost the whole point of it. It's so restrictive. It's typically less than 50 grams of carbs. I've heard of plans that are even lower, less than 30 grams of carbs for the whole day. Which actually counts out not only fruits, but a lot of vegetables too. So you're basically eating all fat, a lot of protein. Anecdotally, there's a lot of individual studies, I guess, or case studies we should call them, that people claim to feel better, have better endurance, better outcomes with it. But the big group studies that have been done by like Louise Burke, You Conduct, those crew have found obviously performance decreases once you follow this because carbohydrates are the main fuel for endurance performance, main fuel for the brain. So long term in the group setting, there's no reason why it should work, and I would never recommend it. If someone's set on doing it, they're going to do it. If they're doing it properly, they're probably going to feel like crap and not be able to keep it up. So that's a long answer to your question. Any other diet programs you guys have heard people talking about or plans that come up a lot in your circles? Oh yeah, so much fasting questions now too. Same thing, like if it works for you, or you think it works for you, fine. Again, it's not something I would ever recommend, especially in the settings where I'm at. College setting, no way. Olympic setting, no way. If you have older adult athletes, weekend warriors, people that need to lose weight, perhaps that's something you could try on your own. I'm not going to give you guidance on that necessarily. Actually, worked with one of our Pistons coaches who was following that, and he said, I'm not willing to give this up, but can you help me with my food choices? Sure, I can do that. So I gave him some food ideas and that kind of stuff. So, and I said the same thing to him. It's not something I recommend, but you're welcome to continue, and I'll try to help you do it the best way that I know how. So that's, I think, is a good way, too, to have that sort of approach with people and not, no, you shouldn't do it, no, you can't do it, that's bad for you, those sort of terminology, and just kind of work with what, within what they're willing to do. So, yeah. What else you got? Go ahead.
How did you get into sports nutrition, and how did you, get into the field or the job that you're in right now?
That is also a long question. I grew up as a figure skater. I also grew up in a family that had a lot of sports going on. My uncle was an athletic trainer, so we were always super into what he was doing. My sisters, I have 2 sisters, we were all figure skaters. Played softball, a lot of sports in our house, so super interested in that. I also loved cooking, and so I thought that I wanted to be a chef, and then I realized you could kind of do both, and I'm like, okay, that's cool. But I think I originally got into dietetics for selfish reasons, and coming from figure skating, like, oh, they can teach me how to be skinny, this is going to be great. And then, of course, you realize being a dietitian is not necessarily about being skinny, and it's, health and wellness, and obviously it's not about me. So I think I learned a lot in those first few classes about what the purpose of this major was, and then got involved with Michigan State, had a sports nutrition program on campus for the athletes, so I started volunteering there, and I was like, this is so fun. I can't believe this is a job that you can have. And at the time, it really wasn't what it is now. There wasn't so much focus on it. There wasn't a lot of jobs in it, but it's like, well, I see that it's happening at MSU. I know this exists, so I'm going to do it. And I got into my internship, and every turn that I took, they said, don't do it. There's no jobs. Dietetics is for clinical, dietetics is for eating disorders, dietetics is for obesity and diabetes. It is not for sports. You're not going to go anywhere with it. I heard that from many different people, and I don't know why, still did it anyways. And by the time I finished grad school, it just exploded. And there was just so many opportunities. And even now compared to then, there's so much more as far as GA positions, internships, Major League Baseball, their new player agreement, part of it was that every single team has to have a dietitian, a CSSD, RD, accessible to the players, which was a huge thing for the field. And in the past, professional sports has kind of been that last untapped area where there was some consultants, but not a lot of involvement. And now there's so many full-time people in pro sports. So it's just grown so much. So I think I kind of accidentally fell into it, fell in love with it, and then realized you actually can have a career in it. So I kind of was backwards in that. But having the sports background, I think, really is what prompted me to get into that. So, yeah, it was fun. And I think getting into what I have now truly has been about networking with people. I started with Team USA because my cousin knew somebody, and they called and asked me a few questions, and that was it. And I thought, okay, don't you want to know if I know anything? Well, they had already called around about me, and so it's really kind of how it works in those fields a lot of times. So I didn't really have any formal interviews for that, which sounds crazy. With the university, I reached out to them. My husband got a job in an area where there weren't any full-time jobs for me and what I wanted to do, so I reached out to the university and said, do you have anyone? Are you interested? And they're like, yeah, come do all that stuff. That's great. We have $0. We can't even give you a t-shirt. And I'm like, okay, well, it's something, I guess. So I did a little volunteering, and then it grew inch by inch, slowly but surely. Staff there now. And then same thing with the Pistons. I, through networking, became friends with the Red Wings, the NHL team's dietitian in the area. And we had lunch one day, and she said, hey, do you want to work with the Pistons? I don't have time. I was like, yes, what? Of course I do. So that was a little bit more of an interview process, but it worked out. So definitely get to know. If you're not part of any groups and you're interested in going into sports nutrition, I would highly recommend getting to be part of SCAN. You guys familiar with that? Sports, cardiovascular, and nutrition. Yeah. So it's their wellness group, sports, nutrition, and wellness. subgroup as part of the Academy of Sports. Gosh, I'm getting them all. Thank you. Thank you. Academy of Nutrition Dietetics. So their subgroup is a really important one that gives out a lot of good information, good connections, and then the Collegiate Professional Sports Dietitians Association, CPSDA. They have a listserv that I'm a part of, and it's been a total game changer. So basically the listserv is all of the collegiate and professional sports dietitians can email each other back and forth, send ideas, questions, research papers. They also post jobs, GA positions, internships. So I encourage everyone that asks me about sports nutrition to join there, and they have just a really small student fee that you can become a part of that group, and it's really been helpful for me to be part of that too as a professional, not just as a student. So that's a good one. Yeah.
Do you think eventually it'll become the norm that all Division I schools will have a dietitian on their staff?
Yeah, I mean, I would hope so, but it's all limited by budget. And there's, where I'm at, I'm 19 hours a week for 300 student athletes. So I'm really limited, and no matter how many times I tell them, I want to work more for you, please, like full time, I want to be here all the time. It's just a matter of budget. I think what would be amazing if it was some sort of NCAA requirement that has to be a service that athletes have, but not all the schools can afford it still, or want to put money towards it. So there's still so much room to grow, but that would be awesome if that was the case. I mean, you have big football schools in the South that maybe have 3 or 4 full-time dietitians, and then you have schools that have nobody playing against, these big schools. So it would be great.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm on the soccer team at Maine, and we have our strength and conditioning coach give us nutrition advice.
Yeah, that's something very common that we hear that kind of makes us cringe. But people have really good intentions, but it's all about that scope of practice. And so not ideal place to get nutrition information from. Yeah, good. What else do you guys have? You want to go from your list over there? Okay.
Let's see. So this is just actually, I think there's maybe at least 1 or 2 of us at the table who just did a research or designed a research proposal around vitamin D and athletic performance. Mm-hmm. So I'd be curious to just hear your perspective on that relationship and what you're seeing in your athletes.
We are lucky that we get to test not all of our athletes, but most of them for vitamin D at the university, and then all of our Team USA athletes, and then all of the NBA guys get vitamin D. So many people have low vitamin Ds, especially the African American athletes, the darker skin, they don't absorb as much of that UV light. So we've seen just so many people, to the point where if we can't do bloods, we usually just say, okay, let's give them a base recommendation for supplementation, even without knowing their levels. We actually did at the university a research study with our basketball teams looking at that exact thing, vitamin D and performance. And from the research that we read ahead of time, it seems fairly clear that if you have someone with a deficiency, if you supplement them, you're going to see improvements in, if not performance, for sure in muscle and bone mass. We didn't see a whole lot, and I think part of the reason was we didn't give them enough, and it wasn't a long enough time period. We also have a hard time with those student athletes getting them to eat enough, so those are all confounding factors. We only did 4,000 once a week, so especially for big, dark-skinned people, it wasn't enough. But that was just what we could do and what was feasible. So I think I would love to redo that study on a bigger scale. Now that we're out of that study and that I have control over what we're doing, we are giving them 5,000 a couple times a week. So we retested them a couple weeks ago, and they were all above that insufficiency level, which was the highest that we had tested them at, so that was really cool. They were all above that 20 range, and before we were seeing many of them in single digits. So for optimal levels, we like them to be above 40 for that blood level. So that was pretty cool. But vitamin D is a big issue right now, and especially when we have athletes like figure skaters that are going to train inside all summer. So those guys are people that need to be supplemented all year usually. Some athletes you can say, okay, once it gets nice outside, you can back off and just make sure you spend some time outside. But again, knowing, like we talked about in our talk here, that knowing the culture of those sports can help dictate what you tell people to do. Yeah.
Do you do anything to actively try to prevent disordered eating among athletes?
Yes. Would I like to do more? Yes. So we try to get in front of all of our sports teams at the beginning of the year and do lots of education. So I think education is our best chance of helping people in that situation. Obviously, there's genetic factors, social factors that you're not going to prevent at all. We've had some pretty serious cases this year that have been really challenging, and we would like to start some sort of group, student-athlete group, or some sort of professional group. We're working on designing our protocols for when do we pull someone from sport, what's our return to play protocol, what dictates that, who gets to make the decision. So we have a lot of room for improvement on that, like how do we treat them as well, but the prevention piece is really key. I think what we may do with this especially high-risk team that we have is kind of use some data from this season and talk to them about it at the beginning of next season. These are some consequences. This is what we've been seeing, and this is what we're trying to prevent as far as injuries and that kind of stuff. So kind of education and then using some previous experiences to kind of hit people at the beginning and design a good screening tool that we use at physicals. That's our goal. But it's definitely the hardest part of my job, and it doesn't matter what type of sport, you're gonna see it, male, female, all different types, and it's really hard. And I think you asked me earlier about did I have any specialty training in that before I started, and answer is not really, and is it helpful? Absolutely. So I would love that to be part of internship programs, part of our undergrad training, is do a lot more with eating disorders. I think I had one elective class, so not everyone had to take it, and then it was maybe like one chapter of one nutrition class. So I think if you're in sports, you're gonna see it. There's just, statistically, there's no way to avoid it. But on top of that, you also need to know when to refer. So when is a case beyond what you can deal with? When does this person need to see a specialist? Because I am not one, don't want to be, don't claim to be. So knowing like how far can you help, what situations can you help in, and when do you need to refer that person out? That's also challenging. Where's that line? So yeah. More?
I'm just curious, so for people who are those weekend warrior types and are squeezing training in, particularly in the very early morning hours, what do you recommend for just nutrition strategy?
Yeah, that's hard too. I think always ideally you're going to have people eat before they train. If they're training at 5 or 6 in the morning, they may not be willing to do that, and that's just what's the way it's going to be. So some strategies for that: you could have them eat a snack before they go to bed. That's something that actually works really well. Or have people don't usually like this suggestion, but tell them set your alarm for like 3 or 4, have a Cliff Bar next to your bed, eat it, and then go back to sleep. And you really haven't lost any sleep that way, and you're ready to go in the morning. People don't love that suggestion. Or doing like really simple things, banana, applesauce, things that digest really easily, really quickly, that you can have while you're starting even. If nothing else, having some fluid before you start your training is really important.
But it definitely sounds like you're a big advocate for making sure you do something and try to avoid that training on an empty stomach completely.
Yeah, usually. And I know there's been some studies about training fasted, and what it has shown is that you may burn a higher percentage of fat in your training, but if you can't keep the intensity level up, then that's a problem. So if you're doing it to try to lose weight, you may be burning fewer calories, even if they're more fat calories, which isn't going to help you lose more weight. Or if you're training for performance and you can't keep up the intensity you need to, that's also not going to help you. So yes, typically try to get people to have something if we can. Yeah.
What's your opinion on like electrolyte drinks that are more natural, like coconut water instead of Gatorade and stuff like that?
Well, sports drinks, Gatorade is designed in a really specific way, and people have problems with Gatorade, but their company does a ton of research, and it's based off of sweat data and all sorts of stuff. They've been doing it forever. So there's a certain ratio of sodium to potassium that they have, a certain carb concentration that they have that's designed very specifically. Coconut water actually has way more potassium than it has sodium, so it's kind of opposite. And if you look at the composition of sweat, it's a lot more sodium than potassium. So coconut water is not really an effective electrolyte supplement. My other thought is like your cells aren't actively like, oh, this is sugar that's from Gatorade. No, this is sugar that's from coconut water. Okay, we like this one better. No, they don't really know what it is. And same with sugar. There's different types of sugar, different pathways, but your body doesn't know natural versus non-natural necessarily. So I don't have a problem with sports drinks. The problem with them is people using them when they don't need them. That's really what I see, especially kids. So for the most part, kids, unless they're training at a really crazy elite level, really young, don't really need it. And that's a good time to start teaching that food first idea. And if someone's not training really high intensity, sweating for longer than an hour, they really don't need electrolytes or carbs or anything else. So proper use is really the struggle, not necessarily what type. You guys ever heard of people making their own? Yeah, so that's an option if you're trying, if it's important to you to do more home-based foods. A colleague of mine does, it's water, apple juice, and then a pinch of salt. So that's something you can do. You can use really any type of juice as long as it's in the right concentration. Something that's too concentrated is going to cause some major GI issues for you while you're training. So that's something to be aware of too. But there's lots of things you can make on your own, and if you want to use coconut water, you just need to add a little more salt to it.
Do athletes that are training in cold environments, does that impact their overall caloric expenditure? If they're in the hockey rink or in the ice rink all summer long, do you have to account for that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, not so much. The issue that we've seen and what I've learned from my colleague at the Olympic Training Center are the sports like cross-country skiing. The hockey girls have so much equipment on, they're pouring sweat. I mean, they lose several pounds during a game in sweat. Figure skaters, too, they don't sweat a whole lot, but they do stay pretty warm out there, and they're out there for, in a competition setting, only a couple minutes at a time. But like cross-country skiing, for example, they're outside for hours. They have very thin, training wear. So that's definitely an issue. What she's told me she's found with that crew is that they don't like to drink because they're so cold. So they end up getting dehydrated as well, even if they're not sweating as much. So she developed a warm recovery drink for them that she'll take to events and keep it in like a coffee carafe. And so it's a carbohydrate-based drink that they can have that's warm versus a cold sports drink, which I thought was just brilliant, and they all swear by it. So I think that's what I've learned with that one, yeah. But it's amazing how hot the the hockey team gets, and really thinking about the reality of the equipment is important too. Some of them wear like a lot of underlayers, and if they sweat a lot, that's something you can talk to them about. Well, do you need to wear the long sleeve shirt? Can you go without it? I've had that conversation with a couple of our basketball guys too, who wear like the compression shirts under their jerseys. Like, well, let's go without that. You'll sweat less and you'll have to drink less during the game. That may feel better. So, yeah, a lot of interesting things that you talk about that are not about food. It's wild, yeah. Yep. So any of you guys work in sports now? No, middle school field hockey coach. Very cool. So what, go ahead, grab the mic. What nutrition issues did you maybe see with that crew? Because middle school is a really tough age for nutrition.
Yeah, a lot of girls would come to practice. They'd have candy, and me and the 8th grade coach, we'd have like a talk at the beginning almost every day of don't bring candy to games, don't bring candy to practices. Like, you will feel like junk after. And it took a couple weeks for the 6th grade girls to actually realize that what we were saying was true. So they'd be like in the middle of practice, I don't feel good. It's like, well, did you eat a school snack or did you bring a snack of your own? They're like, we brought our own. It's like, try the school snack, it's a little better.
Yeah. What sort of snacks were those?
They'd have fruit, Cheez-Its, like healthier kind of stuff. And they had juice too, which was helpful, and water.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and you probably see at that level too a very wide range of body types, heights. It's when you see that, you know, the differences in growth and development over that time, and you have a team of people that have 1.5 feet of height differences on the team. In different stages of growth and development. And so it's really important to watch what sort of messages you say regarding food and body when you have so many different body types at one time. It's a tough age for aesthetic sports too, and where you get a lot of really inappropriate, bad, unhelpful things being said, sometimes by coaches about what, you know, expectations on their body and how they should be feeding themselves. So growth and development nutrition is its whole other beast, and how you talk about it is tough. So kudos for working with that crew.
Yeah, it's always, please bring water. It's helpful, just drink water.
Yeah, I see a lot. I work closely with one of our figure skating rinks in the area, and I would say almost everyone that calls me from there is somewhere between 11 and 13, and it's a mom calling to tell me that the coach asked the kid to lose weight, and how do they do it? And so see a lot of those. So go through our conversation of it's not really appropriate to lose weight at that time, but how do we feed them well and then let them grow taller? But coaches don't like to wait. The other thing that I see commonly, and this is across all sports, is if there's some sort of performance issue, it gets blamed on the body weight first, especially in aesthetic sports. So if an athlete is struggling with a certain issue, they'll say it's because you're too heavy, or if you lose a few pounds, you'll be able to do this or that. So those are really challenging messages to work through, and if you have to communicate with coaches about that, it's really tough to say, well, it's probably your coaching, not the kid's 2 pounds, but don't usually say it that way, but that's what we're thinking. So those are tough ways that, conversations that have to be said, and how do you talk to parents about that? Aesthetic sports are really hard, but it's part of the ball game, so.
Just curious, because like you said, in the sport field, do you get a lot of question about inflammation diets or what they can do to help their performance status related to that?
Yeah, we do. And it's a good question. And really, if you have a good balanced diet and lots of fruits and vegetables and colors, you're going to be eating a diet that's going to help you with inflammation. But a few things like omega-3 fish oils and cherry juice and spices, we're learning more about those things now. So those are actually things that we keep with the hockey team, especially. We always have tart cherry juice for recovery. We give out a lot of fish oils for inflammation and keeping those levels stable. Started trying to incorporate some spices into like smoothies and different foods just to make sure we're covering all our bases, and none of that stuff is going to hurt, and it may help. And talking to people post-surgery is another time that comes up, for sure. Yeah.
Do you conduct consultations with the athletes? And if so, like, what are your parameters for deciding if you need a consultation? And then do you also have access to like what you would have in a clinical setting, like their medical records and like physician notes and that sort of thing?
Yeah, good question. Not usually have access to all that stuff, but it depends on what setting I'm in. So at the university, any of our athletes can come see me, and I get referrals in person. I sit in the athletic training room, which is, side note, so important for you to be visible wherever you're at. If you have an office like in the wellness building across the street, you'll never see a soul. So be where the action is. That's been really helpful. I lost my track. I went off on a tangent. Oh, so okay, got it. So athletes will come see me because they know who I am now, and then I'll get referrals from the athletic trainers, from coaches, strength and conditioning. I think there's a lot better understanding of why I'm there now. There was, I think, a taboo before that you just see a dietitian if you have an eating disorder, and if people find out you're seeing the dietitian, like it's like a big hush-hush thing, yeah. So I think now that the emphasis is on performance nutrition and people understand that it can make you a better athlete and be an advantage for you, it's drummed up a lot more interest. So I try to see as many people as I can, and starting with those team talks at the beginning of the semester, I try to get people to make individual appointments after that. So that's a good introduction and get people thinking, well, maybe I'm not doing everything right, maybe I should ask a few more questions. So we'll do that, and with hockey, there's not as much opportunity to see people individually because we don't have a home base necessarily. All the athletes train on their own around the country, and we just come together for camps and tournaments. So I'll have often people reach out to me, like text me or email me, or when we're at events, they'll ask specific questions. We do things over the phone. I wish we could do more of that. And then with figure skating, I have assigned athletes that are in my area, and so I try to see them as often as I can individually. So there's a big range in who I can see, when I see them, what information we have access to. The hard part of being a contractor is that you don't necessarily have access to all the team stuff. With the Pistons, we have a good setup so that I can get into their electronic medical record. So that's great. And then the team docs, the whole staff is at all the games. So I can see them and ask questions there. So it's a little bit more accessible with them, but there's a big variety there. Yeah.
At Oakland, do you ever have a problem with coaches coming to you saying, like, I want you to help my athlete lose weight, and kind of like going over their head, and it being more of the coach's issue? Because I feel like with the professional athletes, it's like, in a way, I mean, they're getting paid, so like they do need to stay on top of things more, but like college athletes it's like a little bit different. It's not your job technically. So is that like, I just feel like that'd be inappropriate, but do you ever have that happen?
Yes, and sometimes it's inappropriate and sometimes it isn't, I would say. I think we're lucky that I work with some really good coaches there that know the best way to approach these. Not all of them, but they'll email or they'll come down and say, hey, worried about this person, can you meet with them? And that's the best scenario. So I know the background, I know what questions to ask, I'm not going to sit them down and say, your coach thinks you're fat, so let's figure it out. We can kind of go backwards around that a little bit. It is a problem when coaches they often have one-on-one meetings with the athletes, and they'll say, you need to improve your fitness, or you need to lose weight, or even gain weight. Stresses people out too. So when those conversations happen in the wrong way, that's a really challenging thing to work through. But I think it's good that the coaches come and tell me those things, because they're trying to do it the right way. And, it kind of is a job of a student athlete. They're getting a scholarship. They're getting a lot of benefits by being there. So they do need to be in their best shape. As long as we frame things the right way, are paying attention to their mental and physical health.
Yeah, I've just heard a lot of stories of like coaches being a little bit insensitive about it, maybe. And
For sure.
it triggering
Yeah.
like disordered eating.
And I'm sure that there is a lot of that going on, and I think some sports are more than others, and figure skating, that's a big problem, as I mentioned. So it's, big variety there. But the more we can educate, and we try to do with figure skating, do coaching sessions and write articles for the coaching magazine, and try to educate people the best way to talk about it, when to refer. What's your scope of practice? What issues do you need to send people out for? And that, we almost try to frame it as like, it's so great that you don't have to do this yourself. You can just send them to the dietitian. So try to frame it of like taking like a load off for them if they can utilize our services, and then we can talk about it the right way.
And then also, did your dietetic internship prepare you at all to work with athletes, or did you feel like you kind of had to like figure it out on your own by getting experience once you were done with your internship?
Yeah, so I volunteered in undergrad too, so I had that experience, and then my internship didn't have any sports, and they were like super anti me going into sports. But I had already made arrangements for grad school, so just what happened. So, but the internship was important to get the clinical experience, and we were talking during the break that you can't separate the clinical from the sports nutrition. You're gonna have anemia, you're gonna have the eating disorders, you're gonna have IBS, you're gonna have food allergies. So you really do need that clinical background. I know a lot of young sports nutrition students are wanting to go into sports internships, dietetic internships, so the sports focus. I would never say not to do that, but there's nothing wrong with going to a clinical internship, and you'll get a lot of benefit by having that good clinical base. And working in a hospital is something I probably should have done, honestly. Would help me boost those skills, and I was just a little impatient and wanted to get right to it. But that is helpful, and there's nothing wrong with spending a little time. There's going to be a job in a year,
We have a question from online,
All right.
from our virtual participant.
Okay.
Have you seen any athletes that have used beetroot juice as a supplement? And
Yes.
can you sort of tell us more about that?
Yes, I love it. Actually, I should have mentioned that with your question. So that's something, it's kind of like cherry juice in that it's from a food. So we don't necessarily consider it a supplement. It's a food-based product. So that's a great thing. And there's good research on it, and there's a lot of good companies out there. So I have recommended that and have kept it around, and then trying to work actual like beets into menus and that thing. And I have one of our hockey girls makes a beet breakfast concoction. So yeah, big fan.
What's in beets that's so
An
interesting?
antioxidant that's a vasodilator, yeah, so it can help you improve aerobic performance. So, yeah. It is, it's fascinating, all that kind of stuff. And turmeric is really big right now. And anything from a food, from a plant, go for it, it's not gonna hurt you. Yeah. What else do you guys have? Go ahead.
All right, so speaking of plants, I'd like to hear what you've seen in terms of athletes who are adopting plant-based diets.
Tons and tons of questions and people asking about that lately. And it's another one of those, if it works for you, great, but we just have to plan things out well. We already have a problem, I guess you could say, with anemia. And we know that animal-based proteins are typically a pretty good source of iron. So just monitoring, making sure that we're getting enough of those things in, and that may be where you start to recommend multivitamin. If you have vegans, something with B12 in it, iron. So just as long as they're following a good planned program, I don't have a problem with it. This is kind of where you have to bring your judgment in. If you have someone that you know is not necessarily the most responsible person, or if you know that your dorm cafeteria does not have options, and that's where this person eats, you may want to encourage that person to wait until they're in a better situation to do it safely, because I would say a poorly planned plant-based diet is not a healthy diet. And you can still eat meat and be healthy, and you can not eat meat and be healthy, but let's do it the right way. Yeah, and if they don't have the tools and resources to do things the right way, then it doesn't mean it's healthy. Like your vegans that eat Oreos, that sort of thing. It's not healthy just because it's plant-based or vegan. Yeah, but I think ideally in the perfect world, it's probably one of the better ways to go if you can.
Do you have an opinion on collagen supplementation for like joint health?
Yeah, so that's also something that we've been using. Thanks for reminding me of all these things. The research that I've been looking at closely is as far as soft tissue healing from surgery, from injury. So I have used it with people post-surgery. There's a certain vitamin C collagen protocol that we've tried. There are not very many. Actually, there's only one that I know of that's got a specific certification, meaning that we can use it. There's a lot of collagen products out there, but the best thing you can do is go to the baking aisle and get the gelatin packets. So I tell people to throw those in smoothies. I think it's something that can be really beneficial. It's not going to hurt you. So I'm all for that one.
Could you talk a little bit more about when you were going to, with a big group and trying to do all the food preparation? How do you take in account of all the food allergy, sensitivity, and like, how did you do that? That was like a big group of people, and then food that you guys have to bring and prepare.
Yeah.
Like, what was the struggle or some of the things that you encounter?
Yeah. Well, I was lucky to have been with the team. Basically, the whole quad, they call it, is the 4 years leading up to the Olympics. So I started a few months after the Sochi Games, and then was with the team that whole time. So learning and being with them on the road, you know a lot of what they're choosing and what their preferences are. And then having a chance to do one-on-one sessions with people. We sent out lots of surveys over the couple years of food preferences. So we try to do those surveys once a year. They have physicals at least once a year. So just collected that data over time. And then with figure skaters, when we saw them at their high performance camp, said, okay, this is our plan for the Olympics. What are your food preferences? What's your favorite pre-competition meal? Have you changed your diet at all? And we had a lot of new vegans at that time. So we took all that into account, just collected that data over time. And there were 4 of us dietitians that worked together with the Olympics, and we all had our different assigned sports. So they did their group, I had my group, and we just kind of collaborated on all of our data. But yeah, and really the Olympic Training Center staff did a bulk of that. And, we all weighed in on the menus, but they designed them, sourced the food, shipped all the food. It was a huge, huge operation. So yeah, it was fun though. Yeah. But very cool to be able to say we know what every athlete wants to eat, and we have it. So that was cool. Yeah.
I think we're at the end point.
That was so fast.
For
okay.
session number 1.
Okay,
I'm
great.
glad you thought that was quick.
Yeah.